Michelle, thanks so much for joining me today. I always love our chats. We're going to dive right in. Tell me, let's do it. Tell me how you got into the wild world of marketing. What's your origin story?
Oh, okay. Well, it was a little bit accidental, I have to admit. I had big ambitions of studying cell biology and genetics and graduating and heading straight into medical school. And when I actually spent some time working in an ICU, it was a bit of a reality check. And I happen to be a person that just loves, like, I'm a more of a generalist. I'm not a specialist. And so, like, I don't think I had that language back then, but I knew I wanted to, be involved in like really exciting work. Not to say that being a doctor is not exciting, but it required me to be too focused. And so, after some early career gigs, I would say my most sort of iconic experience that like cemented my passion and love for marketing was with Lululemon. I got the coolest role there. It was called Hometown Community Manager. What does that even mean? But they needed somebody who was going to be responsible for, okay, we have this big global brand, we're doing big things, we're on this hyper growth path, but how do we show up as a brand in our hometown? So how do we take our sort of global brand strategy and make that come to locally in the most important market, like at the center of our hearts as a brand?
Which specifically was Vancouver.
Yeah, it was Vancouver, which actually some people don't know that Lululemon is
Yeah.
is founded in Vancouver, but yeah, it was very cool. I was sort of pinching myself. I was like, this is actually a job. Everything from how does the store ambassador program show up to, this big, we're hosting thousands and thousands of people for a half marathon race, and how do we show up and show them the best time? And yeah, let's do some yoga on Kids Beach, stuff like that. It was a really fun, but also like just it anchored my love for creative marketing. And I think from that point, convinced, and I've sort of held true to this throughout the rest of my career, that like I can't work for a brand that doesn't have a strong purpose. And Lululemon surely did. And I've been incredibly lucky since then to only work with brands that like have a purpose declared and are doing everything they can to sort of channel their work into that purpose. So yeah, that's how I got my start.
Do you think that landing that Lululemon gig was just luck? Was it meeting the right people? Had you done some work that kind of set you up to be able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this like red thread for me up until when I moved to the States, and I knew nobody, like nobody knew me from this this coffee mug that I'm holding. But really, truly in Vancouver, building my career was so relationship based. This gig at Lululemon, I was covering a mat leave for one from one of a friend of mine, but like I still had to. It wasn't like a shoe in. I really had to work for that job and go through intimidating interview processes. And but yeah, like definitely, I would say sure having some marketing communications experience prior and having planned events and done that kind of thing. But really, like, I could not have landed there without the relationships that I had built, had pre-existed. Thank you.
For
Is what
sure.
I'm trying to say.
And that was, I mean, such an awesome trajectory. Like, since then, you've worked with a slew of really interesting brands from Lululemon. You went on to work at Bailey Nelson, an Australian eyewear company. You worked with the original cult following romper company, Smash and Tess, which we got to work
Yep.
rebrand on together. You and I are both alumni of Kit and Ace. And now that we're kind of a week into the Summer Olympics, the brand that you've worked at that maybe feels most relevant is Athleta. You got to spend a couple years there, and you were part of the team that shaped some of the most iconic athlete and celebrity partnerships I've seen. Alicia Keys, Allyson Felix, and of course the Queen Simone Biles. That Power of She campaign was really, really powerful and sent a big message about Athleta. Tell me about that campaign.
I'm
Give me
so
the
happy
story
you feel
behind it.
that because that was totally the goal, was for you and people like you to feel like this sends the right message. But yeah, I mean, perfect timing. Like the spirit of the Olympics is alive and well, and we have the like really exciting reality of having Simone back in the mix. And obviously they crushed. I forget what what they're calling themselves, but it's like a hilarious acronym. Maybe we'll put that in the show notes. But yeah, so I'll tell you how that sort of, yeah, again, under the umbrella of Power of She, which is really Athleta's core like brand platform. We were at this kind of critical growth juncture, heading toward a billion in sales, which is massive. And, we were already doing incredible work from like a brand storytelling perspective, beautiful stories of women athletes, but more on the sort of amateur level, I guess you could call it. And, we were like, okay, what's our looking at the market? It was super crowded, right? Like there's all the competitors. We really felt at that time, and still, I would say is true for Athleta, is the differentiating factor, the competitive edge is by women for women, the like really committing to that audience of women and girls rather than sort of trying to branch off into other categories and like really just owning that space. And so we had this challenge. All right, well, we know what our purpose is. We're clear on our audience, but how do we reach more people? Like it's the same question everyone is always asking. And it just became so clear that these partnerships with iconic women who were essentially household names, perhaps like with niche interests, like athlete, who might be the perfect like representative for us to connect with and build a partnership with. And that was where this notion of Allyson Felix came in. So she's the most decorated, female Olympic athlete. She's an iconic athlete, I suppose you could say. And what we loved about Allyson is that she's also so much more than that. She's a mother. She's, yes, an athlete. She's also an activist, right? So it was sort of in the zeitgeist, this story about Allyson becoming a mother and the challenges that she faced around that with her existing partner. And, we thought that was an opportunity to jump in and reshape what an athlete sponsorship could look like and have it feel so much more holistic and so much less about it, just that facet of her life as an athlete, and really like make it about the whole woman that she is. So yeah, that was a really cool one with Allyson. And then from there, sort of concurrently, we were prioritizing a category of our business that was Athleta Girl. It was a cool time. The other competitive brand, Lululemon, had their girls brand, Aviva, and they were shuttering that business. So, we were already convinced on our girls business. We weren't questioning whether it was a category we really wanted to invest in. But yet then suddenly here comes Lululemon announcing that they're shuttering Aviva. And we're like, okay, like the time is nigh. We need to make bold moves here. And so we were just in a like we were imagining what could be possible from similar to what the success that we'd seen with Allyson and announcing that partnership. And we thought about our audience, right? Like these girls, they're between the ages of 6 and 12-ish. And we were like, what if we could imagine their bedrooms and the poster that they all have in their bedrooms up? Who is that woman? Who is that person? And it was Simone for us. We were like, Simone Biles, she's revered. She's completely an inspiration for that audience of girls. And we just sort of threw it out there. Like, if there's a role model that we would like to partner with and build sort of some messaging around for that audience of girls, it's Simone Biles. So this podcast is called My Best Campaign, but definitely not even close. Like, of course I was a part of the journey, but really the GM of the girls business and head of merchandising, Katie Miller, I credit her completely with this concept of like, what if we partnered with Simone? And, a smaller category like girls compared to the full women's business, like it was a fight to have to, make a case for an investment this big and have the partnership be really oriented to girls and have, product collaborations that were actually for the girls. So Katie just was fierce in not only coming up with this idea of what if Simone, but also making the bold moves to, like just fight for it within internally. And yeah, I mean, it was just really cool to witness seeing how that became solidified.
Was there any opposition internally, or was it like a slam dunk across the board?
No, I don't think there was any question that she was the right icon, right? It was that like it made so much sense. There was no one could make a case against Simone. It was more like, as you can imagine, these are big investments, right? And it's brand. So it's not like, yes, there's product capsules that are part of these partnerships, but really it's an investment in brand above all else, which like there's only so many investments you can make in that area when you have so many priorities as a product led business. And so yeah, it was more about making the case for having one of these big partnerships sort of service the girls category.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like what you're saying. It is absolutely a team effort. There's product components, there's community components, there's brand components. You were coming in as director of brand marketing in that role. What role did brand play in this campaign? And then how did all the different components fit together?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really so cross-functional. It was like it was a huge collective effort to not only land these partnerships. We didn't even talk about Alicia Keys, but she was another one who came in to sort of represent the well-being lean of Athleta. So really looking at the whole woman and honoring, how do we sort of cement our commitment to women's well-being on the whole. But as you can imagine, these are like their household names. It's no small feat to build a multi-year partnership agreement with not one, but three in the span of a very short period of time. But our PR team, which technically at Athleta was under the umbrella of brand marketing, they were instrumental in the early stages. So in the, reaching out, cold calling, again, another shout out, my colleague Whitney, who was sort of heading up PR at the time. She was so brave, courageous, and just like, I'm not going to say the words coming to mind, but she had gut gusto to make these phone calls, pick up the phone. Athleta, sure, it was big enough, but not, not Nike. And she called whoever she needed to call. And in many cases, like with Allison, obviously her brother is incredibly involved in her sort of personal brand and business. And then with Simone, her mother is super involved. It's a family affair. And so it was really cool to see like how the PR team, not in a really schmoozy PR-y way, it was just authentic, reaching out and building these relationships and getting these contracts over the finish line. So that was, yes, technically part of brand marketing's umbrella. But then once they were signed on the dotted line, it was over to us. I think brand marketing as a term, yes, we were really focused on telling the brand stories, and that was our sort of core. We were the core function owning that. But I think marketing strategy almost is a better term for the role that we played. So, here are these partnerships. We've committed to them. They're 3 years plus long. How now? Then these are the very high level commitments that we made. They'll be in a photo shoot X number of times a year. We'll do X number of product collaborations per year. Those are things were like some really high level sort of guardrails. But then it was over to us to really define, okay, what are the creative stories we're telling? How are we sort of linking into the zeitgeist or the cultural moments that were happening, like the Olympics as a small example, tours that maybe Simone was doing to sort of get more of her purpose driven efforts out into the world, career transitions for someone like Allison, like maybe moving out of competition and into a new role of being an entrepreneur with Seish. So there was so much there for us that was undefined, honestly, at the beginning. And we just had to, okay, throw on our strategy hats and really throw on our like cross-functional relationship hats because, hey, product team, we need you to design these capsules. We've placeholdered them in the pipeline. Go like and also like you're so busy, you have so many other things going on, and so I would say that was our core role as the brand marketing function, was really that like central spoke of strategy and making sure that we were like upholding our commitments with these incredible women. And also like with Athleta, I know we're going to talk about challenges at some point, but it's a matrix organization, and like you have so many stories to tell. It's a good problem to have. We might have a new category launching or a new fabric or a lead product idea that we need to service. And there's maybe 3 other cultural moments like Breast Cancer Awareness Month or all the kinds of storytelling hooks and opportunities that all need to fit into a very short period of time, all with incredibly complex production requirements. So yeah, we really had to play that role of, okay, when are we going to tell these stories? How do we link into the sort of, again, that cultural zeitgeist or those moments that we can't miss out on, right? Like can't miss out on the Olympics. You can't do it. So yeah, it was a really cool seat to sit in, I would say.
And, when you're looking at a 3-year commitment to an athlete, we can't ignore the fact that these are humans and things happen in their lives. Like you talked about Allison launching her shoe line, Sage. And if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, that Olympic year was the year that Simone was really putting a big focus on mental health and she stepped back a little
That was
bit that
little
year.
did we know, right? It was like, okay, we've announced this partnership with Simone. I mean, Athleta had our biggest media day ever in history of being a brand of 25 years or so at that time. So this is it, I think we had to really capitalize on like when we could access Simone leading into the Olympics, get the type of content that we would need. We weren't ready to drop a product capsule by that time. And so it was much more about like, this is the story, this is the why behind this partnership, make it make sense kind of thing. And then she's going into the Olympics. So it's definitely a blackout period. Like we're not having full carte blanche access to Simone during the Olympics. But what we could do is pay obviously close attention, add little touches of partnership in, like, just making sure she felt really loved up by us and supported in any way possible. And then, of course, when something totally unpredictable happened, which is Simone, took a real, like, courageous stand for her mental health and pulled herself out of competition. Like, I think that in and of itself is sort of an example of how Athleta did these partnerships totally differently than other brands on the whole, because, some other brands, you could think of the really competitive brands that really only were in it for the sake of like the athlete in these women. They're thinking like, what an upset, she's pulled out of the Olympics. Like they're having some really tough conversations at that point. Whereas Athleta was like, this, we support you like wholeheartedly. We are behind you, like no matter what happens in competition. And also like mental health speaking of women's well-being, like it's a huge component of what it means to, invest in that area. So yeah, for us, it was just like a no-brainer to be in full support of Simone during that time. I
Yeah,
think it was a really good look for the brand.
it was a really good look. I was going to say it's such an opportunity to live out your brand values where any other brand, exactly to your point, would see it as maybe a crisis to
Yeah.
solve. You were able to lean into it as a brand and really reinforce what you believed in. I heard Allison speak at South by Southwest a couple of years ago in partnership with Athleta about her journey moving away from the previous brand that she had worked with because she wasn't supported through her maternity leave. They cut her contract dramatically when she came
Yeah.
back after having her baby. There was just no support as a female athlete who is also a mom. And hearing the story of how Athleta was able to come in there, pick up that sponsorship, and really do it on Allison's
On
terms,
her terms.
not on Athleta's terms.
Yeah. And things like, for example, again, like Allison, the activist, right? Like, what does she want to do in the world and how can we support it, right? So her initiative to look at the Olympics and not just look at her own experience, but look at all the women competitors and asking what do they need? What could be a resource for them? And then pulling, in partnership with like the Women's Sports Foundation, pulling together a childcare program so that, because like no one thinks about that. No one thinks about women competing on their periods. No one thinks about moms having to schlep their children around to the Olympics. Like just going to uncovering what Allison was like deeply passionate about supporting and then building programs around that. Like that was such a huge part of these partnerships. And again, why they are sort of, we talked a lot about like breaking down the traditional structures of athlete sponsorships.
Yeah. When you look back at I mean, you were there for just a little over 2 years, so you got to be there for a lot of it. What do you think really landed and resonated, and what do you think had the biggest impact on the brand?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think I've seen even now, X number of years out, right? 5 or so years out from the original like inception of these partnerships. Of course, I'm not going to sit here and say, okay, we lifted brand awareness by X% or what have you. Like, I hopefully Athleta has those figures now to look at and celebrate. But I mean, just looking for evidence, I still think Athleta is getting credit for these partnerships. The partnerships are still, within, I guess, contract, or maybe they've renewed. And, when I have conversations with people that maybe at the time when I was working there, they're like, where do you work? Or they called it Athleta, or, they
I'm
just
guilty
don't,
of doing that too.
sure, no, you nailed it this time. But versus now where it's like, oh, I used to work for Athleta. Wow, like that's so those relationships, those partnerships with Alison Felix, Simone Biles, Alicia Keys, like probably not all in the same breath, but there is that linkage, there is that association that has been accomplished. And I think that was the original goal. If you look at it from a pure like marketing strategy perspective, like we needed to lift brand awareness, right? What better way than to work with and partner with household names, like women that are, everyone knows who these women are. So I think we really accomplished that. Um, yeah, yeah, I think that's the main sort of like celebration point of the work, and knowing that like Athleta made a pretty, at the time, bold investment into brand awareness. And we I think as you grow, and this could be true for any business, small, big, what got you today is not what's going to get you to tomorrow. So all of the incredible work that Athleta had done to build these authentic relationships, to always feature, real women in campaigns, to, launching the girls line, for example, I think, yeah, that was all necessary to get Athleta to that point, that tipping point of like, we're going to hit $1 billion in sales. But like, what's next? You have to be ready and willing to make these bold investments, and that you don't have any guarantee are going to land or pay off. I think so much of what this also made these campaigns successful was the cultural narrative, and a lot of it was timing, right? Like Simone and her experience at the Tokyo Olympics, Allison going public with her story about Nike and the reduction in her contract offer. That was all like, none of that was necessarily like big things to celebrate. Like there were tough things in these women's lives, but the fact that they kind of coincided with us launching these partnerships, it was really like kind of luck, and strategy blended together.
For sure. So yeah, big risk going all in on a campaign this big and this costly. Also, so many moving parts. You talked about the challenge of kind of planning out that calendar for the year. Were there any other big challenges that had to be overcome as you either approached or started executing on a campaign like this?
Oh my gosh. I mean, so many challenges. I spoke a little bit to fitting into the design. Like Athleta has an incredibly accomplished design team and org, and they're busy. They're so busy. So I really credit, someone like Casey Schumacher, who she was so excited about these partnerships, which I think it requires that. I think it requires the sort of above and beyond passion, spark, to go the distance with these partnerships, because they took, you could either have just, gone and done them to fulfill on the commitments. Okay, we're going to do these product capsules. Whereas I witnessed Casey and her team, spend that time, go meet Allison for, walking through New York for a whole day, and really understanding her style and getting her, Allison is someone who, she didn't come in with like incredibly strong opinions necessarily, or a huge, massive team that had their own opinions. That was one of the complexities of some of these partnerships. But with Allison, I think, yeah, witnessing the time and care that the design team put in to get these capsules right, and to have them be really like truly reflective of the women behind the inspiration. But that's just sort of one of the many complexities. I think from a brand strategy perspective, the hardest thing for us that we came up against, in addition to how packed our seasonal priorities could be, it was also just this notion of keeping up momentum, right? Like it's like a marathon, not a sprint, right? So how do you keep up storytelling momentum over time? How do you ensure that you can both be agile to jump on what's actually happening? Like Simone is currently, removing herself, giving herself a mental health break. How do we as a brand show up for that? And what role, what do we have to say at this point? It's hard in a big matrix organization to even do anything in those moments, right? And I'd say just the the requirement for us to work super far in advance to accommodate the schedules and of very busy women, and then to find the right angle and the right message at the right time. Let's say when the Olympics isn't happening, or they're not in competition, or let's say, I think with Allison, we did it very well when she was launching Seish, because it was like, okay, we're going to be a right there with you partner. We're going to do, we're going to like, I doubt it could have been in the contract, but I presume it was like based on creative thinking was, oh, we're going to do these like exclusive colorways or silhouettes or what have you of the shoe to launch only in Athleta stores, so that it solidifies the partnership. So that was tough. It was a creative challenge for sure over a long period of time.
Yeah, I think about even, having worked in-house at enough brands, we know that you always are thinking about new faces, new talent, and to have that 3-year commitment, keeping it look fresh and not stale, finding new stories and new angles. That's always a challenge.
It's hard. And what I want to say about that is it's important. It's so detrimental when you go into a partnership with a mindset of short-term wins and short-term gains. Like you have to, I see it time and time again, even at the scale of something more micro, like an influencer relationship, for example. You go all in, you have all this energy and momentum at the beginning, you go all in, it lands really well when you launch it. But then what? Like I think about Dakota Johnson joining up with Maud sexual wellness brand, and they got to do this big announcement at the beginning of Dakota joining up as a founder, really, and a co-creative director. Like that's a big thing. And then it's like, okay, then what? Like how do we continue engaging Dakota over time, weaving her into the stories? Because the story is no longer like we've launched this partnership. The story has to be deeper than that. So yeah, I believe it's so important to like caretake these relationships and have the right structures internally set up so that you don't drop the ball, pass the baton off. And it's hard when there's turnover internally, and there's risk there.
Yeah. You've talked about all the different people internally that touch something like this, but we all know something of this scale doesn't just happen in-house. You always have partners. What role did agencies play in a campaign like that?
Yeah, good question. So Athleta was like during my tenure there, we had different setups. So when I joined, we had actually made another bold move, another bold decision to take creative fully in-house. So we did have an agency of record, and then we actually built up a really strong internal creative team, and we did so much of that work internally and like with great results. Like the team is so talented. And that said, we always had, partners that we could bring back in. Let's say we looked at the pipeline and we said, like, there's no humanly possible way that the creative team has the capacity to take on all these stories or all these briefs. And so it would be at that point that we would say, okay, well, who's in our like agency network and who can we bring in and or even like RFP or what have you, right? So there definitely were times where with these campaigns, especially too, they're bigger. Some of them were based on some of the requirements of these women, right? Like they end up being bigger productions. So yeah, there were times where we leaned into agencies, but I think like I couldn't answer this question without plugging and celebrating our internal team for how incredibly talented they were. Some of them are still there, rocking it at Athleta. Huge kudos to the team.
Yeah. You have since moved on and done some really interesting things since then. And you mentioned that red thread through your career. And when I look at it, your move then to Smash and Test and on to Day, which we haven't talked about, there was really a continuum about empowering women and women's health. Was that intentional or coincidence? How do you think a path like that comes together for a marketer?
Well, I mean, there's so much nuance to it. Obviously, there's like, where do you live? Are the roles remote? Do you want to work in a big or small organization? Are you open to partnering with a founder and working in a founder-led business or not, right? But yes, like short answer, yes, for sure. There's like, again, I kind of unknowingly made this commitment because of my early days at Lululemon and kind of getting a taste of what it feels like to be working with people who are all really bought into a purpose. And, like at Lululemon, it was like, well, how are we elevating the world? I mean, it's a big, lofty vision, right? Elevating the world from mediocrity to greatness. Like there's something palpable in that. So yeah, I think just I've totally carried that with me. And law of attraction, like I think I just naturally, likely because I care so much about it, I naturally end up gravitating to or attracting, whichever way, conversations with these businesses that really fit the bill. But yeah, I think since Athleta, because Athleta was huge, right? Like comparatively similar to Lululemon, but potentially you could argue even more matrix because of the kind of Gap Inc. umbrella. I think at the time of leaving and making that kind of tough decision to leave, I was craving smaller again. Like I've wavered back and forth in my career between big, small, startup, medium size, what have you. I've had a lot of variety, which has been great. But I was definitely at that time craving being back in a smaller, sort of more agile setting. And then it just so happened, yeah, both brands that I worked and with post Athleta were really hyper focused on, again, that women's audience with Smash and Test, having women feel immensely comfortable, maybe with, I think they've leaned more into like fashionable these days versus when I joined, it was really still like the core of the romper and the revolution of the romper, right? It's like, what does it mean to be able to like feel comfortable in yourself and at ease in this amazing garment? It's like just one and done. And then of course with Day, like having the opportunity to, I hadn't actually worked in the like specifically women's health and sort of femtech area. And so that for me was like a new build of experience, but also like fit right in with again what I care about. They're so committed to their mission and passion and purpose.
Yeah. So you're about to take a little break because what our listeners can't see is that you're fairly pregnant. And
Yes.
I know that you still are keeping a finger on the pulse of what's happening in the industry, both in terms of what's happening with women's brands and health brands and marketing in general. What have you seen lately that you're really excited about? Who do you think is doing something really cool on the brand or marketing side of things?
I'm a tough critic. It's hard to impress me. Yeah, I am. I'm in a transition right now. It's been an interesting one with playing the role of balancing and playing the role of mother of, a mom being in motherhood. And like frankly, I'm building this next chapter of my career. Like I've done a big and small organization thing like you said or like we talked about. But I think that, yeah, I'm really excited, and so I'm at a place where I'm totally absorbing what is out there in the world. What's the trend? What are brands and businesses maybe struggling with so that I can show up with a solution and support and use all of my experience to, support the types of brands that I really want to see grow and thrive. I think one of the things I've been seeing is it's just a harder time to win, especially for smaller brands that can't, let's say, compete with the media or ad spend of some of these bigger, their direct competitors. Like it's just challenging. And for me, what I've seen work so well for other brands is who are committed to their purpose, have a strong why, kind of having a diversified program of marketing that spans beyond okay, we're just going to distort into performance marketing because that's what's driving the like short-term return on investment. I think there's starting to be a bit of a reckoning out there, and it's not working as well as it used to, frankly. So like, yeah, I see businesses like trending toward things like building communities, and, having sort of leaning into relationship-based marketing, perhaps like geo-based if they're embarking on a new market entry strategy. And yeah, to your question about like what I'm seeing that's exciting or inspiring to me, I thought about this one, and some of the like some of the people that are out there actually building these communities, that's what's really inspiring to me. So there's a company called DM, I think that's how you pronounce it. They're like a new sort of social search engine, which like, sure, what is that? What does that actually mean? But it's really oriented to women, and the conversations that are like maybe not happening like in isolation on Google, like you're Googling these things that are maybe a bit taboo. But instead of that experience, what they're trying to create is, well, I get to ask this question that might be a little like, again, seen as, and find other women who are having the same experience and share an information share, and, like commiserate in a way in some cases. And I think like I'm super inspired by those types of communities that are emerging and seeing how brands are even clicking into that. So for example, like a brand who might focus on understanding your gynecological health, like Day, or another brand that's US based called Evie, them clicking into DM and kind of hosting conversation threads and providing education that like maybe would be too hard to find and comb through on Google, and you know filter out the misinformation and what have you. So yeah, I think stuff like that I'm really inspired by right now.
Mm. Yeah, I'm definitely seeing the same movement towards community with the brands that we're working with. And when you originally said it, I was thinking about in-person community because we are seeing brands gathering people in big ways
I
again.
know, like if we can even dare say it post pandemic, but
Yeah,
yeah, it definitely, like I saw the same thing, an uptick in a desire to gather people, right? To bring people together and create these brand experiences that are memorable, right? That you couldn't do like in a virtual setting.
absolutely. And it does seem really effective, but I love that you called out ways that people are still using digital platforms, but in totally novel ways, like not the digital
Yeah.
platforms that we immediately default to and think of as connection. And this sounds like way more of a two-way street than a lot of the digital engagement platforms that we just default to.
Yeah, when it's a lonely experience sitting there trying to Google the answer to something that you're feeling potentially a little bit of shame around. I don't know, like
For
hopefully not,
sure.
but having a community meet you there on the other
Totally.
end is super cool. And yeah, that's why I credit, like I celebrated that brand for doing what they're doing. Super cool.
Yeah. Amazing. All right. Last question for you before we wrap up. You've been at this for a while. Anyone watching the video will see that you have a true baby face, but you've been in the industry for a good chunk of time.
I'm an industry veteran at this point.
Yeah. What's the best piece of branding or marketing advice you've ever been given?
Okay, so I can credit the same person for both of these concepts, I suppose. When back at Lululemon, it was a formative time. It's why I always go back there. We had a great leader, a brand leader. His name is Duke Stump. And for those who don't know, you can look him up and hear some of his amazing. I used to call him the Philosopher King because he endless sort of wisdom to share. But for me, two of the things stood out. One that he used to say, and then we kind of adopted as a team as a mentality. One was, when we focus on sales, we suck. And when we focus on our purpose, we win. And I truly believe that. I can't sit here as a marketer and say that like driving sales isn't important. Of course it's important. Of course you need to be growing. You can't plateauing or even, declining year over year. But that said, I do truly believe that when you focus, it's about where you put your focus. The sales are an outcome of the good work that you're doing to stay true to your values, your purpose, and, just to be good and do the right thing. And so, yeah, to me, that just really stood out, and it just continues to ring true. And not everybody gets it. Like I've totally come into teams in my career where it's like, that's the one and only pinnacle thing that we're striving towards is, we're going to hit X in sales, or we're going to 2X our growth, or what have you. And I just see the effect on the teams. I just don't see a motivated team when that's the like goal, the North Star. So that one was definitely impactful for me. And the other I think is related, and it was come from a place of inspiration versus desperation. So to me, when you're in a desperate mindset, you're looking all around, right? You're looking at competitors. You're seeing other brands jump on trends. You're saying, why didn't we do that? Like, you're in that negative mindset where creativity just has no room to flourish. Whereas coming from a place of inspiration, you're almost like, okay, forget them, forget what should we be doing? Again, it roots like rooting back. I know I sound like a broken record, but rooting back into your purpose. What is right for us? What feels actually inspiring to us? Campaigns, we used to have like a litmus test for campaigns. And I love this. And I was like, I'm going to carry this through to every setting, is when we launch something, do we feel it? Like, can we walk around the office back when we all walked around offices? Can we feel the energy? Are people genuinely excited internally? Because that's definitely going to be an indicator of like, is it going to land out there in the world? So yeah, I'd say those two pieces. I don't even know if they're advice, but they're just like, principles, words to live by that really were like so big for me and continue to be to this day.
Absolutely. Okay. We know you're having a baby soon, but what's coming down the line for you? And where can people find you and follow you online?
Okay. So funny you asked. Because of this transitional period that I'm in, and I'm kind of, I've made a commitment to kind of go in and work on, priorities that are super important to me. I've also concurrently taken a total break from social media. As a marketer, when you're in like a high level marketing role, you can't like not be on social. You can't not be out there like kind of tacked into what's going on in the world. So I have taken this opportunity to like remove myself from social channels. So don't try to find me on Instagram. Don't try to find me on TikTok. I won't be there. I'll probably be on Substack with my newly regained attention span, reading long form articles. I highly recommend a social media break, by the way. Where you can connect with me and what you can follow along with is, and something I'm super excited about, a friend and former colleague of mine, Krista Hall. She and I have been working on, in light of this trend that we're seeing out there of, everyone needs to drive organic traffic, diversify their marketing investments, distort a little bit away from this purely kind of performance world that we've been living in. We saw an opportunity to take our depth of experience in this notion of community marketing, right? Like, how do you build communities that are meaningful, loyal, like the right communities for your brand? And so we want to teach that. We want to connect with brands that are, or founders, founding team, marketing leaders who are like in this position of having to quickly pivot and not knowing how or where to start. We're in the works of building out a really robust sort of training program. It's called Community Academy, and it's not launched yet, but we're working toward a fall sort of soft launch. That's kind of slide in right before my baby number 2 is born in October, and then with more a full launch in the spring. But definitely connect, reach out, and find us on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in getting into the realm of community, we can help you.
That actually sounds like something that I would want to follow along with and probably immerse myself in.
Amazing. Well, good. First client, Amanda.
Count me in. Okay, Mish, always love our chats. Appreciate your time and all your wisdom. Thank you so much.
I can't thank you enough for having me on this amazing new podcast. What an honor.